isn't it?
It's not easy to
No.
reach, is it?
No. We were the finance officers. Makes it down the walls.
Back start back. Okay, well, everybody, I think we're online, live or whatever, and so we'll move on with finance meeting today. Finance and resources. A new chief's here, honoured, present. Yeah. We've got Phil down the end there, who's good to if we ask him any questions later on. Internal audit was it. So we'll move with apologies for absence.
Chair, we've had apologies, I believe, from Toby Neal, from Councillor John O'Lee, and also from Rob Disney, who's the head of internal audit.
Okay, thank you. I'll check those. Declarations of interest at 2. Are there any declared? None. Moving quickly on. So I'll move the minutes at item 3. And they're on 3 to 8, pages 3 to 8 of the meeting on 21st of January 2022. So I'll move those. Can I second it? Ready, second? Yeah. Thank you. Agreed?
Agreed, yeah.
They are agreed. Thank you. Moving on. Move on to the first meeting item, which is item 4. And that's the Capital Prudential Code Monitoring Report to February 2022. Over to Becky.
That's me, thank you very much, Chair. So the last report we brought to January committee projected a slight overspend of £116,000 for the year. We've been working really hard trying to pull back on our expenditure given the budget position next year and the years after, and trying to make sure we try to at least pull that 116 back. We're now projecting an underspend of 234,000, and that's largely because we've been holding some posts open a little bit longer in administration, in the admin posts. So we're got about a vacancy factor of around 11% at the moment, which is very high. That's sort of inadvertently been helped because we're really struggling to recruit staff to some of these posts. There's a lot of movement and a lot of turnover. So whole time pay is also slightly underspent, but only around just over about 1.5% for the year. So there's no one big issue that's caused the shift. It's several smaller issues, as you'll see when you look through. None of the budgets are vastly different to what they're just up and down a little bit, each of them. So the transport costs are coming in with an overspend, which is I think we need to align this a bit better with the contract. I think the contract, we underestimated the amount of activity that we needed in the contract. And also we've got an ageing fleet that's resulted, and we're struggling to replace some of the fleet as well with the capital programme because of the delays in the vehicle market. Fuel budget as well as obviously overspending, and we're getting some pressures in that area. So that's mostly it on the revenue side. There's nothing majorly different to what we reported back in January. The reserves on page 14 are looking with just about 10 million reserves, which is slightly better because of the revised position that we're with the revenue monitoring. So we've got slightly higher than we were anticipating last time, which puts us in a better position going forward. Capital programme. We have one request for some slippage. Just find that page. So for the rescue pumps, which is what I was talking about. So we have we've had a problem getting the pumps that are in this year's programme built in time, and that's largely just with all the vehicles, the problems that in the marketplace at the moment. We're just not quite managed to get them in and progressing. So there's a delay on that. So we're requesting slippage of that project of just over £1 million. Worksop station is progressing well, so that's almost complete now. So that's good news. The new headquarters, that's now, we're, as you know, we're mostly in the building. It's 99% complete. there's a phase 4 of the project which is looking at alterations and refurbishment of the existing buildings, and the tender prices have come in higher than we were expecting than that. As with all building costs, the budget for this was set, well, it must be 3 years ago now, so it's unsurprising with the market like it is that it is slightly coming in above. So we're doing some negotiations with the moment, looking how we can amend what we're asking for, so the way that the contract works is that the amount that the fire service put in is capped at a certain limit, so it shouldn't have an impact if it goes above that, but it's an area that we obviously need to monitor. So financially it shouldn't have an impact, but it might mean that some of the work that we're intending to do, we might have to delay or revise our expectations. So prudential monitoring, moving on, page 18. There's one correction I'd like to make on the actual borrowing figure in table 4. It's 28,932,000. Should read 32,932,000. It's correct in the text in 2.44, but I noticed this morning that it's incorrect in it's got an old figure in. So we borrowed some money in back in January to take advantage of the low rates. PWLB rates have risen. I wouldn't say substantially; they're still quite low, but we predicted they would be going up, and we took advantage of borrowing probably more in advance of need. We weren't actually expecting to borrow till either March or early next year. So that's taken the borrowing higher than what we would anticipate that we would require for the year, which is it's treasury management. We can borrow in advance of need if we need to, and so that goes towards funding some of the 22-23 programme, but we've taken it out slightly early because the rates were significantly lower than what they would be if we'd waited, and that's the borrowing does last week. I can't remember what the term was for that, but I think we took a mixture of 25 years and a 10-year loan. So the interest rates obviously add up on a 2 million loan over that amount of time. It makes good financial sense to take it out when we can know that the rates are low. So I think that's it. If anybody's got any questions, I'm more than happy to take them.
Eddie? Yeah.
Page 16 about Eastwood Station. It says that EMAS has withdrawn their 1.5 million. So does that mean that fire station and ambulance is not going to be built now?
Not as a joint station.
Not as a joint station. So what's going to be there then?
I think, do you want to build on that?
Well, I suppose, Councillor, the feasibility study is still going ahead. We're going to look at the capital programme and review it anyway. I think it's prudent to do that. We'll get the results of the feasibility study. We'll then get some idea of things like costs and affordability, and then we'll have to sort of look at that across the capital programme for the whole of the organisation, and then make a decision and bring that to members about whether that goes ahead or not, and if it goes ahead, when does it go ahead. So at the moment, there's no change. There's just a feasibility study that's going ahead, and then we'll review the capital programme and then look in terms of the medium-term financials plan about whether we can, can't, or when and if we do that as well.
Yeah.
But the EMAS thing, their requirement is not at that site.
Right. So is that for the ambulance and fire station?
Well,
it's in the community hub.
At the moment, we've only known that it's for us, and EMAS have pulled out. In terms of other agencies, because if I go back a number of years, 6, 7, 8 years, there was a real intent that to be a community hub. Anecdotally, I've got nothing to base this on. That doesn't seem to be the will or the financial capability to do that. But that's based on a bit of hearsay and anecdotes.
Yeah, I've had hearsay that the
Yeah.
community hub was going ahead on just levelling up fund or something.
Might be.
It's certainly not a conversation that I've been involved in. I don't believe that's...
No, and that might be. I mean, the levelling up fund is sort of fairly new money, so I would imagine that it might be something, because we are looking at redoing the study for the, so it's something maybe we could look at involving in with the councils who would receive the levelling up funding, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
So it might be
seems
something.
The town council gets that, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, at the moment, just in terms of that, where we are today, there's a feasibility study in that members have had reported to that's what we're doing. Officers will be looking at the capital programme of a review about affordability, and that'll have to be brought back to members anyway. That clearly has an impact on the estate about what we can do and when we can do it. Bearing in mind there's quite a lot of other demands across the rest of the estate as well.
No, I understand, but it's from a personal point of view and a council point of view at the weekend. A friend of mine, that also lives in Eastwood, needed an ambulance, and it took nearly 6 hours. In the end, I had to get a friend of mine down, and we had to pick a 92-year-old lady up.
Yeah.
Because we couldn't get an ambulance.
Yeah.
And we didn't know when we couldn't leave her in the porch on the floor.
Yeah, I think that's representative of certainly conversations I've recently with EMAS colleagues. They're still seeing demands on them that they'd see in winter pressures now. And I think it's not, it's been reported on news, quite the amount of ambulances that are sat at A&Es waiting to discharge their patients into the hospital environment. So it's clearly having an impact with nationally still at the moment.
I just think if we had a station up there, it might just ease things around the Eastwood area and make things a little bit better.
Yeah, well, I suppose my view about ambulance stations is they're not for parking ambulances.
No.
Because they should be out and doing what they're doing. So it's a bit like fire stations. Everybody rides past a fire station thinking, all right, great, there's a fire station. But nobody knows if that fire engine's available or not.
No. Okay, thank you.
Thanks for this, Stu.
Can I go back to 2.6, page 11, pensions costs? Talk me through a bit about, obviously there's a bit of an overspend there, but is this still sort of for planning purposes, or are we starting to incur any costs on McLeod, and how will the costs on McLeod play out?
So we have put some money in provisions for the McLeod remedy so the amounts that we think that we will need to pay out. So those that we can be fairly certain of and we can calculate, then we can put a provision in the accounts, and that's what we've done. There are other costs that we don't know about yet, or we can't calculate with any degree of certainty. So one of the recommendations is that we do set up a reserve for £200,000 to cover the costs of McLeod if and when they arise, and that so it's similar to a provision we actually pay for this year, because we know those costs we've incurred. We will definitely be incurring those costs, and that the earmark reserve is just like a savings pot, because we know there's something coming down the road, but we don't really know how much. And until we get the actual information from, or the legislation is passed through Parliament, we're not going to be in a position to know that, and that will be in October 23, and there's already talk that could be further delayed. So we made a decision at Policy and Strategy, I can't remember the date, a couple of weeks ago, to go ahead with implementing the McLeod remedy, and there are additional costs that are likely to be associated with that regarding the tax payments. So we know we've got, and we can put all the pension payments through the pension fund, as we always do, but there are some elements of expenditure which will now be considered taxable for one reason or another, and it's that tax element that the authority will be required to pay initially, and it's whether we can claim that back from the government when the legislation comes through. So that is legally we have to put the firefighters back in a position had the age discrimination not taken place, which is why we have to pay them for their tax loss, if you will, because it wouldn't have happened if the payments had been made at the time. So we have to pay that, and it's whether we can roughly whether we can claim that back. There's a lot of complications around it, but that's the simplified version of
Yeah.
where we are.
I mean, the reason I ask is because obviously the McLeod judgment was, overturning the original government position on pensions, which have been found to break the law, for want of a better word. And you would expect then that the government would have to sort the remedy for that out financially. So I'm just wondering why we might end up with increased costs for a mistake of government.
The government are saying that they will correct it when the legislation goes through, which at the moment is October 23, is the date we've been given. But clearly, we've got pensioners that are, people that are coming up to retirement and pensioners that have already retired that legally in court have won the case to say that we need to correct their position. So by doing that, we have to put them back in that position, but the government are saying because we're paying it in advance of the legislation, we're doing that at our own risk. So we are a bit between a rock and a hard place, and we have that's why we brought the report to policy, because as scheme manager I could have made that decision, but there is a financial risk involved, and that's why we brought it back to finance policy and strategy committee, because by paying it early, we know we have to. If we don't, we're likely to end up back in court. But if we do pay it, there is a risk that we will incur those tax costs and any other administrational costs as well.
We thought between the employers and the employees' representatives nationally that there was a framework that was put in place based on the government guidance that was available at the time. Government saw fit then to withdraw that guidance, that then placed questions around the framework that had been agreed between the employers and the employees. But that's effectively not being underwritten by government. Government departments have said there is significant risk of doing this before legislation is laid, but have not been able to articulate in any detail what they mean by that risk, which is unhelpful again as employers. Nottinghamshire's position and London Fire Brigade actually its position, we were the named cases taken to court. We had 2 ill health cases in Nottinghamshire and we were taken to court over that. And that was, I think, it was about £50,000 it cost the authority in legal fees to deal with that case. So the Policy and Strategy Committee, that's now a public record in terms of the report, has laid out with Becky as scheme manager on the authority's behalf about what that might mean financially. Some of the guidance does say that you may consider the fact your legal position and whether you're likely to be taken back to court or not. And the Fire Brigade Union actually sent us a letter that was appended to the Policy and Strategy Committee report saying that it would be their intention to take legal action. We're waiting for a decision. So the fire authority is basically between a rock and a hard place. We're either going to incur costs through taxation, not getting it paid back, or incur costs through the legal process with the employees' representatives taking us to court.
Yeah.
So it's damned if you do and damned if you don't, I'm afraid. It is not helpful whatsoever. I can't sit here as your chief officer and say this is, we need to be patient about these things. We're talking about people's lives when they've given a career of service to the public.
I want to be clear for the record, I'm more than happy that we're paying what we have to pay. My case will be that we get it back from who should be giving it us back, if that's possible at some point.
And I think we're in as authorities go, we're probably in a stronger position than other authorities, because some authorities have made decisions not to pay, and some are paying people that are coming up to retirement, but not those retired members. But it does say in the letters that we've received from the Home Office that they will take into account if the risk of us being taken to court, and because we have the letter from the FBU saying that is their intention, that does put us in a stronger position to be able to claim that funding back.
Good.
Thank you.
Just explain a bit more about this age discrimination.
Yes. So
I'm just interested because obviously it's been mentioned and does exactly which way is it discriminating or?
So when this goes back to the new firefighter pension scheme back in 2015, So they brought a new scheme in, and rather than transferring everybody from a certain date, they allowed people to transition in, but that was based on their age rather than maybe their length of service or another way that they could have done it. So they were allowed to, depending on your age, you were allowed to stay in the 1992 scheme longer, and not transfer into the new scheme. So generally the benefits are better in the 1992 scheme. Some instances they're not, but generally it's a better pension scheme to be in. So those that were allowed to stay in because of their age were treated preferentially. So it got the FBU, and there was the judge's case as well. It's a similar pension scheme, took a joint case to employment tribunal and won, and it's gone all the way up to the Supreme Court, and we've been told that it's age discriminatory, and we need to treat everybody in the same way.
Okay.
So we're in the process of allowing everybody to stay into the 1992 scheme to the same date now, and then everybody moves across into the new scheme.
Okay, thank you.
So, but
Yeah.
But because this has been going on since 2015, it does affect all those people that have retired since then. It can affect all of those, and those that are coming up to retirement that have been paying into the 2015 scheme. We now need to put them back into the old scheme, to the 1992 scheme, so they have longer membership of the 1992
In that
scheme.
case, has had a ripple effect on other public sector pension schemes, because that's why I know about it,
Yeah.
as it has in the civil
Yeah.
service.
The genesis of it was the Hutton review into pensions, into public sector pensions, which is probably 2008, somewhere around about there, around the affordability on the taxpayer of the public pension schemes. I think from a firefighter's pension scheme, I think there's something like, I don't know, something like 800 million going out and 300 million coming in annually. So the deficit is growing by about 5% per year, roughly. So it's clearly an issue that is very difficult to grasp and deal with.
Yeah, no.
So just for this authority, on average, every year there is a shortfall in the pension scheme from what we pay out to pensioners to what we receive, of usually between 8 and 10 million pounds just for this authority, and that comes from the taxpayer, which was why the new scheme was put in place, so that contributions are higher, so that it relies less on the contributions from the taxpayer.
Well, I suppose this problem's only going to get worse with people living longer, isn't it? Because you're going to be paying out for longer. If they're only working 30 years, but they could potentially draw the pension for more than 30 years,
Yeah.
that's going to be an even bigger problem.
There's a wider issue at the moment with the other claims that are being brought. So people that have been on-call firefighters, there was a date in time where they could claim back their on-call service, and some of those people will have moved to whole-time firefighters in that time, and now claiming back firefighter pension scheme payments. That might mean that they can leave earlier than we thought they were going to leave as whole-time firefighters. So there's a number of other claims that's complicating workforce planning, that is particularly giving Becky a complete nightmare, and why the authorities put more money into kind of pensions administration support, because pensions administration and issues now, certainly one of our HR managers, is probably taking up all of their week now, is just dealing with pensions, not HR issues.
Big problem for everybody, private sector as well. It is.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, Callum, have you got No. Thank you. Can I just ask on the, the slippage, 1.166 million for the rescue pumps,
Yeah.
will there be any added cost to that because it slipped into another year? I'm thinking of,
No,
with inflation running pretty high.
it's part of the contract.
It's part of
that
it.
The prices have been agreed. It's just that they can't get all the parts that they need.
So, it's a big sum.
Yeah,
It's got
it
them
is a big
suddenly
sum.
come
It
along.
literally is the vehicle chassis can't
Yeah.
get from the manufacturers to the coach builders.
Right.
Literally they can't get the vehicles because there's been a pandemic
Yeah.
and there's still a massive delay.
Yeah. That's fine. Nothing else? We move those recommendations on page 20. Seconded? Yeah,
Thank you.
agreed?
Agree?
Yeah, thank you. Moving over quickly to item 5, which is the internal audit report.
Okay, so we used to have one big annual audit report a year, and then we depend about 7 audits at the to that one report. But, a couple of years ago, we decided it would be better if you had them, if we drip fed them a little bit more, so you didn't have so many all at once. So we've had 4 audit reports out of the 7 for the year we've received, and those are all appended onto this report. They are the payroll and Trent audit financial management code, which is another item on this paper, so I won't on this agenda, so I won't dwell on that too much. Asset disposals and the performance management. We have a draft one for the ethical policies and procedures. I think that might have even been released now, but I haven't attached that because it wasn't final when the papers were sent out. We have substantial for the payroll and Trent, which is a really good audit report. Normally we're quite happy to get a reasonable. There's always something that you know, if people are looking at what you're doing, there's usually some areas for improvement. So to get a substantial is good. I'm very pleased about that, but it is an area that obviously we have systems in place. I have no changes in staff, and things have always worked quite well. So you'll be, you know, and as we know, with 80% of our costs go through the payroll, so it is good that does offer substantial assurance. The asset disposal audit, I requested Phil and his team to undertake, because there had been some instances in the press of fraudulent activity on asset disposals in other services. So, and it's an area that we'd never audited before. So I suppose by doing that you do open yourself up for some scrutiny, but that's the whole point of the audit function. So they have come back with limited assurance on that, but it's fair to say that it's not that they have discovered anything that evidence of any wrongdoing. It's just that we haven't been recording the things we have been doing properly and following the procedures that we have in place. So Phil's team are going to come back next year. We've already put procedures in place to correct that, and then the team are coming in next year to re-audit it to give you some assurance that those recommendations have been made. So, and then the performance management audit, we had when we asked the audit team to undertake the audit, we had staff that could facilitate it, but unfortunately that didn't. Some of those have left, and we now got another member of staff in now, so we've had to delay the audit. So hence you didn't have enough information to actually come up with the recommendations. So that's going to be audited again next year. So I don't know whether you've got anything you'd like to add to that.
No, I mean, that's broadly the situation. So there are some audits that are above the line, as it were. Payroll was very thoroughly examined and tested, and we didn't find a single issue there. So that's testament. The audit on the financial management code is a good example. We'd already carried out a self-assessment, so that provided second-line assurance. We came in as third-line assurers to re-examine what we'd done, and again, other than maybe some areas being a little out of, some of the procedures and policies being a little bit out of date, there was a little bit of a concern over budgetary spend as well in one area, so that we drew attention to that. We said a bit about that. Below the line, I mean, assets disposals, I mean, that's the most interesting report of all of them. I mean, it is actually quite hard from experience to, it's an area that's important but not urgent. Assets can sort of get overlooked in the scheme of things, asset records and so on. I think there's some quite interesting findings in there, some of the gaps in the records and fleet, for example, and IT. So we've drawn attention to those. They just need more focus, I think. I think that's the issue. You know, if you have the records, you do need to complete them. So that's that one. Performance management, we started off at a cracking pace on that one, and it was I think staff have been under pressure this year, and it was maybe one of those that we just couldn't get the information we needed to test it. We have actually put quite a bit of material in the report around the expected controls and the stated controls. And most of the stated controls, actually, it would seem that policies and procedures are in place, but we just need to test the actual performance records. You know, we need that depth of testing. We can't come up with opinions based on what we're told. We need to examine the records and determine if you know, performance is being, appropriate targets are set and being monitored, and that the records are reliable. And then there's quite a bit more to do, as Becky said. We've just issued a draft report on ethical policies and procedures, so that should be cleared quite quickly. We've done doing some really interesting work on pensions administration. The delay on that report is ours, actually, but we're comparing payroll and personnel records at the moment using data matching software. So we're coming up with some interesting results, and we're going to share those with Jackie Horton probably in the next couple of weeks. Again, no, not necessarily any concerns, but just where some of the data that raises questions. So we'll do that. Finally, facilities management. I think your facilities management people have been under a lot of pressure this year, so they asked for an audit towards the end of the financial year. So we have actually had some feedback from Leslie Grace in the last couple of weeks, so we're going through that. We also need to we've got action tracking to do with previous recommendations, with an exercise to finish there. Then I've got a wrap up with the annual audit report, which will come before this committee on the 24th of June. So I'm happy to take questions.
Thanks, Phil. Steve?
I don't know if this is a question to you or to the chief, actually. It's about disposal assets. I'm just thinking things through, because obviously I'm...
What page from?
well, I'm now looking at page 5 of 9 on the annex for the... after page 42 and 43.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah. So it's about disposals, and I was thinking, what things do we dispose of? Well, building, we're currently disposing this building, aren't we?
Yeah.
So it's hard to miss that. If you, it's hard to sweep that under the carpet. But vehicles presumably are the second biggest thing that we dispose of, and I can see there's a list of some vehicles that have been disposed of, and that just made me think about what is the plan for vehicles? Do they have a shelf life of X amount of years? Is there a plan that, you know, every few years you have to budget for a new vehicle?
Yeah.
Do those vehicles get sold regardless of what state they're in? You know, if they've done 6 years, is that it or whatever? And then I see these prices that they've gone for, 2,400, one's gone for 4,000, one's gone for 3,700. Who buys it? Who buys, you know, you don't see people converting them into camper vans, do you? So what do they get used for?
Lots of enthusiasts out there, believe it or not,
Right.
that are out there. A lot of the authority has been very generous in the past, and we've tried to as well recently, about sending them abroad to countries that are less well funded in terms of emergency services. And in fact, there's been something like 70 vehicles from the UK in 3 convoys have gone to the Ukraine.
Right.
So aerial ladder platforms, fire appliances, 4x4 vehicles, those kind of things. So it's those kind of things. Hopefully we're not waiting for wars to send things in that sort of stuff. And other people, private buyers, approach us to say, have you got any coming up? Even, you know, dare I say it, party events where fire engines are used. You know, not my kind of world, but it's somebody's world.
Yeah.
So they always generally come here, whether there's a donation opportunity that the authority might want to do to a good cause. So one of the Mansfield Fire Museums had one in the past, which they've purchased as well. So
Some of these would be just normal light vehicles, cars and vans
Yeah,
as well.
yeah.
And we do, when they come up, we generally plan to replace them after a certain amount of time, but they are reviewed, and if their mileage is low, we'll just extend the life of them.
Yeah. And I think that's the world at the moment, is to have a look at it. So used car market is quite buoyant at the minute, so some of the light vehicles, that might influence getting rid of them earlier than later. We're trying to move to environmental approach in terms of electric hybrid vehicles, so there's opportunities about how we feed those in over the years, and that will influence around the net zero policy around the city. And also the heavier vehicles, we'll have a look at usage. So if they're at a particularly quiet station, we might rotate them to a busy station, or a busy station to a quieter station. But it's around 12 to 15 years for fire appliances,
Right.
roughly. And some of the other vehicles that don't get used as much, as we call the special vehicles, around about 15 years plus. Some of the larger vehicles like aerial ladder platforms, which, you know, over this next cycle of capital programme, you should start to see purchases of the aerial ladder platforms and the sale of the existing ones over the next few years.
Okay, thank you. Eddie?
Yeah, on the sale of vehicles, I mean, are these prices for fire engines, or are they just the smaller vehicles like?
It could be a fire appliance. It could be. I couldn't say specifically which it is,
I'm just thinking,
but they could be.
sometimes the value in something is in its parts, not in its as an engine. From a fire authority, wouldn't it be more beneficial to sell them as parts, or can't you do that?
Well, I suppose we could do that. I suppose within the bounds of the financial regulations, we're able to do whatever we want. I suppose the issue of that is who's going to take it to pieces and then market it, put it on Google, eBay and everything else. So there'll be a cost to doing that we don't have the competencies. We obviously use VIA as our vehicle maintenance, whether they'd be happy to have a yard full of vehicles that they then come and sell off. So I suppose there's a cost to doing that we're not geared up for as a service or as an authority currently.
Okay, Callum?
Yeah, so I know, I believe you mentioned that the asset disposal was prompted by media reports. Is that correct? Not of this
there was a
authority,
couple
but
of instances, and it was an area. To be fair, we'd spent quite a number of years when I started just doing similar audits on the financial procedures.
Yeah.
And we wanted to try and expand that out into other areas that there might be risk, and this is one that we've just had.
I mean, I suppose that's my question actually. Are there other areas like this that could do with looking at?
Yeah, and that's when we bring the audit plan, when Phil and I come up with a draft audit plan, and that goes through the strategic leadership team, and it comes before yourself as part of the annual report. So if you've got any areas that you think you'd like just to look at, then you're more than welcome to feed into that, or, you know, at any time, because we'll be bringing that in June in the next meeting. But so yeah, if there's anything, you know, we pay the internal audit team to look at, you know, we want to get value for money, and that's finding areas where we've got problems in my mind. So that's what we do, and we do scrutinise it at the strategic leadership team, and you're more than welcome to have any input into there as well. And we have picked areas, the red kite audit, for example, as we know, areas where we know we've got problems, because sometimes a fresh pair of eyes from outside of the organisation we don't shy away.
That's what
I mean, that's the whole point of putting this asset disposal. It's come up with things, and it's clear that we do need to make some improvements, because although we haven't had any fraudulent activity that we've found, it's clear that it could potentially happen if we don't correct our systems.
Okay, thank you. No further questions, so we'll move to the vote, which is on page 30, and it's just asked to note in the recommendations there. So move that. Second it.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. Thank you. Thanks, Phil.
Thank you.
And moving on to item 6, which is the SITFA Financial Management Code update.
Thank you, Chair. So I've brought a report to yourselves, I think it was in June or July last year, July 21. SITFA had introduced a SITFA Financial Management Code, largely because some authorities were still getting into financial difficulties, even though, and it seemed to be a bit of a surprise when it happened, it wasn't predicted, even though they'd been following the other SITFA financial codes, such as the Prudential Code and Treasury Management and the Statement of Accounts. They'd been following due procedure, but there was clearly lack of an overarching financial management in place. So SITFA worked on this code, and there's a little bit of detail in the report about the principles of good financial management, and they came up with 17 standards that they expected authorities to have in place to ensure sustainable and effective financial management. So in July, I did a sort of internal review of ourselves against those, and we had 6 areas that were amber, so could be improved, and the 11 areas I felt were okay. We also asked Phil and his team to come in because obviously it's as a head of finance marking the financial management, there is a bit of a risk of marking your own homework there. So that's why we asked Phil to come in. I have in the appendix, it shows the areas that we were requiring improvements on, or needed some more evidence of. So of those 6 areas, 5 of them I feel are now all in place, and there's just one left, which is regarding the governance documentation and making sure that the policies are available on a single point of SharePoint. And interestingly, that's one of the areas that Phil's team picked up in their audit report as well. So the new website has gone live, and we are working on getting all of our policies on there, but they're not on there yet. And also we're having the monitoring officer, Malcolm Tamro, is undertaking a review of our governance arrangements. And once that's complete, those will all be uploaded onto the new website as well. So it is underway, but it hasn't been completed yet. So the audit report is also, I know you've just seen it in the file, I just wanted for completeness, because if anybody goes back to look at these individual reports, is also attached, and it's got a few areas where we've agreed to put some actions on, again about the policies, looking at updating the financial regulations, which we're working on at the moment. I have a draft in my in-tray actually that I need to get round to just making final revisions to before we bring that back to yourselves as well, because that's not been updated for some time. I think it was 2017. And then just making sure that the incomplete and delayed audits, which is something that Phil's mentioned, we have struggled to facilitate some of the audits this year. So it's trying to make sure that they are kept as a high priority. So we've responded to those and looking to implement them as agreed in the actions for the audit report. So if anybody's got any questions on that.
Mm-hmm. None? Okay, we're asked to note the report, so we agree. Thank you. Moving on to corporate risk management.
I think that's me.
It's Leela's coming.
Will I invite Leela to come
Me
and do it?
too. Yeah, come on, Leila.
Come and join us, Leela, it'd be good.
Morning, councillors.
Morning.
So the corporate risk management report is the standard report that's presented to the committee every 6 months. So what we use the report to is to present you with the most up-to-date version of the corporate risk register that we've got, and also just to draw out any significant changes to the risk environment that we're operating in at the moment. So the main parts to pick up from the report are in section 2.3, so we'll all be aware of the significant global issues that are ongoing at the moment, which include the increases to inflation that we've seen, the conflict in Ukraine and Britain's exit from the European Union, and all of those elements do continue to interact with each other and are impacting on the service, particularly with regards to the vulnerability of supply chains that we're seeing and the cost and availability of some of our resources. Now, you'll see from the narrative that the risk management arrangements that we've got in place at the moment are working effectively. Our procurement team are continuing to closely monitor availability of key supplies. So we've not escalated the residual risk score at the moment, but it is something that we continue to monitor. Section 2.4 picks up on the very high risks associated with McLeod and the firefighter pension scheme, which you've already discussed at length this morning, so I won't dwell on that. And in terms of the recommendations and the other changes that I just wanted to draw your attention to, I would like to recommend that we remove 2 risks from the corporate risk register. So risk number 10 is related to the use of vehicles on authority business. And for those of you that were here when I presented last time, you'll recall we've done some significant amounts of work to reduce the number of vehicle collisions that we've been having, and that work's been ongoing for 3 or 4 years now. And in Becky's report, she picked up the reduction to the cost of our vehicle insurance policy, and that's the second year-on-year reduction that we've had for that policy. The number of vehicle collisions we're having continues to reduce, but also the severity of those collisions. So what we've seen for the last couple of years now is we've had no major accident losses, and the collisions that we are seeing tend to be either low speed forwards or reversing incidents, or those incidents that are unavoidable because they're caused by a third party. So that's the rationale for the proposal to remove that risk. We've got really structured and multi-layered control measures in place within the organisation now, so we continue to monitor our performance in that area, and should we start to see an increase in risk, then we'll of course reflag that up to the committee if we need to. And the second recommendation is with regards to COVID-19, and the recommendation that is also removed from the corporate risk register. We continue to have a business continuity management group structure in place, and we are meeting at the moment every 4 weeks. We're also monitoring our workforce abstractions weekly. We're not seeing significant levels of absence or other business disruptions due to COVID-19, and the proposal is that the National Home Office reporting that we're currently undertaking about workforce absence is also due to cease within the next month or so. So my proposal to you is, or my recommendation to you is that COVID-19 is removed from the corporate risk register, again with the reassurance to you that the governance structures are in place to re-escalate that should we need to. There's a small amount of information there on the insurance renewal that's been undertaken this year. So just for your general information, there is a hardening of the insurance market generally, and a number of our policy covers are based on a inflationary increase they work out the national average pay increase and then apply that to some of our policy covers. So we have seen some increased insurance costs to some of our policies, not because we're seen as being an increased risk, just because of how the market's functioning at the moment. The only element to draw your attention to is the cost of our cyber risk insurance, which has increased. And again, we're not unique in that. Insurers are becoming much more risk averse, I think, because of agile working and home working. So there's some work that we're currently doing with our policy provider to mitigate those increases, and our ICT department are working hard to implement some additional two-factor authentication and things like that to reduce our risk in that area. So other than that, there's nothing else that I'd like to draw your attention to in the report. Obviously the risk register's appended, and happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thanks, Leila. Yeah, Steve?
Yeah, on risk 1, I mean, I think everybody can see the high inflation, you know, it's in front of our eyes. You know, not only the official inflation of 7% on CPI, but, you know, energy inflation, you know, almost at 50%. And we can see what that might mean in interest rates and pay awards. The supply chain issues, because you mentioned exiting from the European Union, we're told officially by government that, you know, things have got better and there shouldn't be any issues with the fact that we've left the EU. And in fact, we were told it would get better. So what are the supply chain issues, and is it linked to our leaving the EU? And if so, what can we do about it, and who are we lobbying about it?
I think from our internal perspective, we do not have significant supply chain issues. I think some of the examples that we're seeing is that a lot of these factors are all interacting with each other. So, you know, we've all seen on the news the queues of lorries at Dover as an example. We are not seeing shortages of critical equipment or supplies that we require. But I think that we need to be cognizant and planning for that risk, which is why it features on the risk register. And I think some examples of how we're seeing the global environment generally impacting on us, we've already talked about the availability of appliance chassis, that is being driven by global factors, isn't it? So I would say the exit from the EU on its own is not causing us any issues that are not unforeseen, but how all of these factors are interacting with each other is why we are wanting to keep a very kind of watchful eye on this situation at the moment.
Okay. Eddie?
Yeah. Is it going to come a point when it gets critical, when the fleet's getting so old it can't be used and we can't get goods in? Or have we got a time span on that where it's actually a critical?
Well, to be fair, we're not seeing that we can't get vehicles. It's just taking longer to get them. So, and obviously the maintenance, we do run a very rigorous maintenance programme on all of our vehicles, and we're maintaining that, and the cost of that, we're seeing that come through in the cost of maintaining some of the vehicles. So I would say at the moment we're not. We're looking at replacing them before the end of their, before they completely fall apart. We are maintaining them and keeping them running so that they're reliable. So we have got some flexibility, and we are ordering, and we are trying to anticipate some of those delays now in ordering. But some of these vehicles take a long time to build up. They're not something that you just go and buy off the shelf. So it does that delay factor. We'd have started planning for these, 2 years ago.
I think my view about the critical side, we shouldn't see ourselves get too critical because we're sat here having these conversations now in terms of the planning of it. I think our adapting to the environment we now see for the coming years, this isn't going to go away, I think we all accept, in 12 months. No, so the future years are going to mean that we're going to have to adapt to that environment. So we'll have to plan it in, the review of the capital programme, when we're doing things, what the cost of those things are likely to be as they increase as well. And I think we also have to bear in mind the heavy fleet, the fire appliances. They're not like delivery lorries that are doing tens of thousands of miles. Either they're doing limited miles, either to do their prevention and protection work or to respond to communities in an emergency. And I think what I have got confidence in the maintenance programme, whatever it's cost us more, the fleet appears at the moment to be in good condition and being looked after. And I think one of the indicators will be, I think the maintenance contract is up for renewal in 24 months' time. And I think that'll be an indicator about which way the market's going around cost of maintenance and the age of our fleet and the position the authority's in terms of its available budget. We have in the past reviewed how long we keep fire appliances if we stick to those. From, I think we were doing about 10 years and it went to 12 years and I think it went to about 15 years. I think to go beyond that, because there might be a propensity to say, well, we'll just extend the life and that'll cut down the cost. We'll just see other costs coming in around maintenance, and it's a false economy, really, in my view.
Yeah, I agree with you. You can't. There comes a point when every vehicle has its end of life.
Yes.
You have to cut it, otherwise it just costs become extortionate.
We have light vehicles, for example, that when we get rid of them, we've only got 3,000-4,000 miles on the clock. So we need to make sure, and I don't like the saying sweat the assets, we need to use it for value for money to make sure we get the right use out of these things. But equally so, light vehicles, you might want to sell them sooner because there's good money for them and you can get good deals on new ones coming in. But that is certainly something the engineering team will look at very closely.
Thank you. And I think we can be confident that ordering early as well, because it seems to be on the two authorities I'm on, they seem to be looking at it now and saying, well, we wanted some at Gedling, wanted some refuse wagons, so we've ordered early. So we're a year, 18 months in front of when we need. No, it's looking at that projection.
Yeah.
And I think that practice is coming in right the way across the board now. So I suppose it's going to be the new normal, if you're right. Anyway, can I just ask later about the COVID? What are we exactly knocking off? Because I'm not quite sure now.
Oh,
And
so-
how long would it be to implement it back? Because I keep getting nudges on council as well. There's in another 2 or 3 months' time, we've got another variant to this
Yeah.
Omicron thing coming, which
So-
is quite virulent.
The proposal is that the corporate risk register, the principle behind it is that it only lists those risks that are seen as being high or very high to
Yeah.
the authority and to the service. And our assessment of the situation at the moment is that COVID does not present a high or very high risk, and therefore the proposal is that it is removed from the corporate risk register. That does not mean that we are removing
Yeah.
all internal monitoring and control measures. So our business continuity management system continues. We continue to monitor workforce abstractions, and if the feeling is either because of a new variant or for other reasons that the risk that COVID presents to the sustainability of the organisation increases,
Yeah.
then you'll see it back here
It's
again.
back in
but
there.
Hopefully
Yeah.
we won't.
Hopefully not, but you never know, do you, as we head through the year.
I
So,
suppose the other
sorry.
thing is we know what we're dealing with a bit
Yeah,
more
a
now.
bit more than when we
but,
first started,
Yeah,
isn't it?
so
Yeah.
we've got, we managed to come through
Yeah.
the last 2 years, and we've learnt a lot from that. So
Yeah.
our ability to cope with it is better as well.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, if there's no further questions, recommendations here, page 73, the 3 bullet points there. Can we agree those? Agreed, thank you.
Thanks.
So we're over on to item 8, which is exclusion of the public, which is written before you there. That's the 1972 Act under Schedule 12A, Part 1. On the basis of regarding all circumstances, public interest in maintaining exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosure of information. Not exactly rushed off with the popular